Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through our perpetually lefty pinko commie soy boy cuck Antifa super soldier filter, but more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. Letterboxd says my most watched theme of 2024 was intense violence and sexual transgression. Guilty as charged. And I can't say I'm pressed to change this. But in 2024, I've also been guilty of backsliding into fear-driven paralysis politically. In 2025, I am trying to change that. So, Craig.
Yeah.
What other pop culture are you getting into these days?
A lot. And I'll start with a New Year's resolution based one, which is I had a lot of time on my hands and I made myself a list of 100 movies that I forget what to call it, like something about the blind spots or movies I wish I would have saw. Because I'm really bad. I get like the scroll paralysis on like streaming services and then I end up not watching anything and then never end up watching the shit that I meant to watch. So I made myself a list of 100. I'm 4 movies through it.
Okay.
Which, if you're listening to this at a later date, we're only in a week and a half into January. So that's not that
4%
bad.
4% is fine.
If it had been like March, then it would have been like, okay. But there are 2 that I want to talk about. And first one is one that like, holy shit, I can't believe I've never seen it before. It's awesome, which is Don Siegel's Escape from Alcatraz. Have you seen it?
I have not.
Holy shit, it is really good. I always just thought of it as kind of like a gruff Clint Eastwood, like macho guy movie. And it's not really that. Like there's so much like care and every sequence seems so like plotted out and well planned. There's a brilliant, like the arrival at Alcatraz is almost like a 10-minute wordless sequence of like just the processes of him like being loaded off the boat and strip searched and showered and given his things. And it's just this really, really good sequence. And then there's this fucking amazing scene that I love so much. It's like so effective and it's like maybe 4 minutes long, but there's a side character in it named Doc, who's like an old man who's a painter. And the warden is this like sadistic warden played by Patrick McGowan, who like hires the guy to do his portrait. And then it's a nice portrait. He just isn't fond of it and revokes his painting privileges for indefinitely. And in protest, this old man, and this is almost also like a wordless sequence, he works in like the workshop, takes a hatchet and cuts off his painting fingers in like a wordless scene and like to protest the warden. And it's like heartbreaking and fucked up and violent and weird. And it's really, really good. I was shocked by how much I liked Escape from Alcatraz. Would recommend. And I got another one of Don Siegel's movies on my list, which Kevin did not have at Cap City Video Lounge, but I just saw him post yesterday that he ordered it and it's there. So I'm going to go get that one, which is Riot in Cell Block 11.
Ooh, nice.
So so that was one on my list. Another on my list of movies that I would like to see that I haven't is Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Hell yeah.
You've seen that one? Yeah,
yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Also completely different than what I expected. I kind of like, it's way better than what I thought it was. Like, I don't know what I thought it was. Like, I thought of it as like, well, okay, it is this, but like a exploitation movie starring like beautiful women, kicking ass, looking hot. But like, it is that. But I also kind of thought it was like The Room levels of like incompetency that like, you know what I mean? Like the, like, but
it has a lot of really fun lines in it. Like one of my favorite is there's a guy that like offers them a soft drink and the main character says, "We don't like nothing soft, mister." Yeah.
I think that's the old man that they like roll up on later, but like also some like beautifully framed shots of them when they're racing the cars in the valley and the mountains in the background. Like it was just, I was pleasantly surprised because it both was and was not what I had always assumed and expected it to be.
See, Russ Meyer is a really interesting figure because he is really prolific, and I think stuff at the beginning of the career and the very end of his career don't neatly fit in the box, but all the stuff in the middle fits in the boob box.
Yeah, the boob box. Well, that's the only one that I've seen of his, I believe. So I have a few others of his on my list. I think Super Vixens is our next one. And then I think maybe there's one other one of his.
So my one of my favorite movies of all time, which is directed by Russ Myers, is Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
That's on there too, because I want to see that one because Ebert wrote it, which is always such a strange thing.
And I think a really important thing, I showed this to some friends over the break who were staying with us. I think if you don't know, a thing that you have to know for that movie to make any sense at all is that it is functionally like a 60s version of Not Another Teen Movie or a scary movie. Like, it is a spoof film about genre films at that time, and specifically the kind of movies that Russ Meyer and his compatriots were making.
Okay, so he's like doing a parody of his own type of
but
shit.
if you just walk into it, it's there will parts of it that will be incomprehensible. Yeah. But if you understand it to be lampooning film culture of the 60s, it makes a lot more sense.
Hell yeah.
I would say.
Well, I'm excited. And
I love it. There's a girl group named the Carrie Nations in it. Okay. And their music is actually pretty good.
Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, they're like a real...
No, like the music for the movie.
Okay.
The songs I quite like.
Okay, I thought you meant there was a real girl group in the movie, but in the movie there's a girl. The movie is fictionalizing a girl group.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. It's it's called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls for a reason, because it's doing a Valley of the Dolls thing, but it's doing something much more expansive than just lampooning simply that movie.
Oh yeah, cool. Well, Kevin, if you're listening, that's the one I'm coming for next, I think, at Kev City.
There's a Criterion version that he absolutely has, because I rented it many times before I purchased my own.
Hell yeah. And then the last movie that I saw that I want to talk about is one that I know you've seen, and I also saw your Letterboxd review of it, because it's one thing that I want to talk about, which is Nosferatu, the Robert Eggers one. I liked it a lot. It's moody. It's beautiful. The performances are really good. Could have used some subtitles, honestly, in my theater for when Bill Skarsgård, especially the first sequence of or not the first, but when Thomas goes to his
90% of his lines, I have no idea what he's saying. Yeah, which I assume is Eggers' point.
Yeah. Well, not only is his voice, he's doing a crazy accent, but like in those like cavernous rooms where it's just like echoing. I was just like, okay, but I think that was like
I have no idea what's being said here. I assume it's menacing.
You didn't really need to. You got the idea of it. But I was like, I saw something that I think it was you that wrote it on Letterboxd. Okay, good. That I was like, oh yeah, that is, I think, the issue that I had with it, which is when the creature is like finally revealed, it's not as terrifying or even as fun as his like disguise version. Because I was very much into the like furry Cossack hat and the mustache that he had. That's like obviously hiding like a fucked up face. Like, I thought that was great to just be like do the Groucho Marx and like, oh, surprise, no vampire if we put a mustache and a hat on. And then like as the movie goes on and the disguise goes, and then when you finally see him, I don't know, maybe like there's so much like shit that is great with the physicality in it that I do also kind of wish that maybe the design of Nosferatu is a little bit better.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of talk about the mustache. Whatever. I don't really care about that. That's not the core of my critique. The core of my critique is that I really don't like the facial prosthetics on him. I find it to be incredibly cartoonish. Yeah. And like the altering of his like brow bone, it looks to me to be a joke. And the rest of the movie is so well designed, so well performed, so well lit that it just really took me out of it. And anytime Nosferatu is actually present, like not just his voice echoing through and calling to, Lily Rose Depp, but actually present on screen, just really took me out of the magic of the movie. And I mean, we've talked about it many times on the pod before. Love vampire films. I think a vampire needs to be scary or sexy, or both. And this figure is not to me at all until the very last scene. I think that the very last scene was incredibly impactful and was genuinely frightening in its design. But every other time he's on screen, I like the 20 minutes where he's on screen but not visible, or he's obscured in some way. And I like the very end scene. And every other time he's on screen, I was like, get him the fuck off of here. Yeah. Like, he's spoiling Lily Rose Depp having an Isabella Johnny moment that I'm loving, you know?
See, I like the disguise. I thought was like really good for the character, like made it more interesting, because that's not what his like weird fucked up face looks like, but it is also like heavily shadowed and hard to see. And then once the disguise falls away, it's like, oh, okay, I was kind of hoping there was something a little bit more terrifying.
Just make it grosser, or like I like the idea of him, I don't know, just going harder in the direction of he's calling to her like libidinally or something. But I don't know, it's very rare for me. Of his other 3 films, I really like Edgar's work, and there is nothing like this stands out to me very distinctly as like an element that I do not like, and I cannot say that is true of any of his other films. Like,
true.
they may not be 5 stars for me, but it's not because there's some component that I'm like, what was the thought here?
Yeah.
What, like, how did you, I don't know, but many other people love it, so it was just my personal taste.
I will say the scariest part to me, and I think the part that I like the most regarding the creature itself, is the way, just the physicality of like when he would I'm specifically thinking of when he drinks Thomas's blood for the first time, and it's like, I think maybe meant to kind of like look like a sex scene a little bit.
I think,
but it is like he's like, his body is like heaving, and there's this disgusting like noises the whole time. Like, that was so creepy, and I love that moment. But it was a good time. I did, when we got there were 4 people that came in face paint and like capes and medallions and top hats, and I was like, oh god, are they gonna like, not to sound like an asshole, but like sometimes when you go to a movie and you see that, you have to ask, like, do they think the movie's just for them, and is this going to be a problem? And you know what, I'm gonna say they were delightful and perfectly well behaved. So, but I did get a little annoyed, a little scared at the beginning, because whenever I see somebody come dressed up, I'm like, oh god. I mean, like, if it's like a fucking goofy ass action movie, who cares? But when it's like a quieter movie and people are dressed up and chit chatting, but and then the last thing, I have another New Year's resolution, which is to read more, and I've already got one book down, and it's a kind of a cheat because I finished Cinema Speculation in 2025, so I'm counting it, even though I read most of it in 2024.
I finished Women in Love in 2025. I'm like, yes, have I been reading that for 2 months? Absolutely, I have.
But the other one I've been listening on audiobook, and I'm almost done, is Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli by Mark Seal, which is like a definitive accounting of the making of The Godfather, mostly like the pre-production stuff. Like, I would say probably 2/3 of the movie is like I'm almost at the end now, and I just got to like where they're talking about like actually shooting it. So a lot of it is like talking about Coppola battling the studios. The thing I never knew about was how the mob tried to get it not made at first by okay, I didn't know any of this. Like, I knew that there was the it's not the Italian Anti-Defamation League, but it's something like that, the Italian American Civil Rights League or something like that, which I of course knew about, but did not know until I read this that was run by Joe Bonanno, who is like one of the heads of the 5 families, and basically was using it like in a bunch of different ways, but kind of was using it to like throw his weight around. And there's a great chapter in it about how they just met, like they had a sit down with the mafia and were basically like, look, this is not an anti-Italian thing. In fact, they're the heroes of it. And then they gave the mafia like essentially like final say on the script, where they let them take out anything they deemed they let the Italian Civil Rights League take out anything they deemed offensive, but really it was Bonanno and the mafia, which was crazy. But anyways, yeah, I would recommend the book. It is really good. And Mario Puzo, that guy he's a nut. He's like, he's really funny. He was like a hopeless gambling addict that one time, like before The Godfather came out, he was in Vegas, and he tells a story about how, like, with the mob, they don't conduct hits in Vegas, because that Vegas is all business. So like everyone would know, if you stay in Vegas, you're safe. So he ran up a huge debt at a casino, and some mobster he didn't know came over and like trying to be nice and friendly and give him a heads up and was like, don't fucking leave the city. And he was like, oh shit. And then who bails him out? Fucking Robert Evans comes because they knew they had this. It's just this whole crazy story. But
have you seen The Offer?
No, but I want to watch it.
Yeah.
I heard there's like parts and pieces that are.
So, I mean, I think it's I feel like it wasn't released at the right time. Is part to do with it. You know, I want to say it came out in like 2021 or 2022. So it's like right after like the lockdown portion of the pandemic. And I just think like its excesses were maybe not well received, in part due to, you know, kind of the social historical context of when it was released. But I think it's worth watching, especially if you're interested in everything that a lot of what you're describing is depicted on screen. Yeah.
I definitely am going to watch it after is it Miles Teller? Is that who's? I think it's Miles Teller is in it, but I was going to ask if you knew if he played Robert Evans, because that was going to be my guess.
No, he doesn't. Matthew Good plays Robert Evans. It has like a lot of famous people that are like
small parts,
like folks that you'll be like, oh yeah, I recognize like that guy, but like it's full of that guys. Yeah, you know, all right, cool. And it's full of that guys. Like there's not very many women in it. Well, I think Juno Temple is in it.
Also, the Godfather tracks with the Godfather,
right.
Which
well, and I think that's also part of it. When I was talking about the historical context, right? Like that time period is like Me Too is really important. I just think like a show that's about a bunch of dudes like doing cocaine and gambling and being drunk and trying to make a movie that they were spending too much money on that has to do with the mob was just it wasn't landing. Yeah. You know? Yeah.
But what about you? What you been watching, reading, all that?
So I'm going to talk about 3 different movies about white women. And 2 of them I'm going to loop together kind of in the same basket because I had pretty similar responses to. And then the third is a movie I saw last night. I'm going to talk about that more in depth. So the first 2 are Night Bitch and Baby Girl.
Hell yeah.
So Night Bitch, if I'm not familiar, stars Amy Adams and is based on a novel about a woman who maybe is turning into a dog. And it's available on Hulu to stream. So if you subscribe to Hulu, you can watch it. Both that and, you know, Baby Girl, which stars Nicole Kidman, have very promising starts, in my opinion. Like they have really interesting ideas even that they begin to launch into, but then they back off the edge of the cliff before they get really interesting. Yeah. So in the instance of Night Bitch, the movie is like spends 80% of it being like she's turning into a dog, and like the feminist themes related to allocation of and division of household labor, postpartum depression, right? Some of these very core feminist themes about motherhood. And then the end of the movie is just like, oh, she made art and now she feels healed and is getting back together with her husband and everything is fine. And then the movie ends. Is presenting all of these interesting, complex ideas and getting really wild and freaky with. I mean, she's like eating dog food. She's like feeding dog food to her kid. It gets really freaky and nasty. And then it just like wants to recover from that really rapidly in a way that is not satisfying. Yeah. Not to say
it's
that
just too neat. And
it's too neat. Yeah, it's just, and it's too fast for the visual medium. Maybe in book form, you get some like, I have not read the novel. You get some additional time. Chantal is saying no. Chantal is shaking her head.
Tracks. Okay.
But it was doing something very compelling and freaky and relatively unusual in terms of things depicted on film for me. And then it just it basically felt like it was like almost a Cronenberg movie and then it's trying to be a Nancy Meyer movie in the last 10 minutes. Huh. And I just didn't care for that.
Damn.
And then Baby Girl was... I will avoid spoiling it since it's still in theaters and I think a lot of people will probably go there are still folks who would go see it,
especially after they hear this episode.
And it's worth. No, I think it's worth seeing. I liked it more than Night Bitch, but the ending of Baby Girl, it just ties everything up in a bow very neatly. And the whole thing about an erotic thriller, which I wouldn't ultimately say Baby Girl is, frankly, a lot of people have been talking about it that way. It's not. But the point of an erotic thriller and the keys in which it's trying to play, at least initially, involve risk. Erotic thrillers are about risk. And it's about who bears the risk, and the threat of sex commingling with other dimensions or arenas of our life. And the end of Baby Girl goes, actually, there's no risk. Like, actually, any risk that possibly existed evaporates. And so for me, it's just not a satisfying film at all. I'm not saying horrible things had to happen to people in the movie. Right, yeah, but like
something that kind of plays with the stakes.
It's like somebody in HR took the fucking end of this script and like drew a bunch of red lines through it, in my opinion. Okay. Then the movie that I saw last night, also Chantel saw last night, that I want to talk about a little bit more in depth is The Last Showgirl.
Oh yeah. I think I'm seeing it next week.
Nice. So first I'll say it's a Utopia film production. That's the company. It's a production and distribution company who made some of my favorite films from last year, or who distributed some of my favorite films from last year, The Sweetest and Femme. They also have done things like Shiva Baby, quite a few popular. They're a co-distributor of Megalopolis, and that's because the Utopia is created by Robert Schwartzman, so part of the Coppola clan, and he's brother of Jason, most known for being, I would say, generally like the average listener, because he is the male star of The Princess Diaries. He's the guy. The Princess Diaries. He's also a member of Rooney, and in the Coppola scheme, he's the son of Talia Shire. Right. Sister of Francis Ford Coppola. If you don't remember,
cousin of Nick Cage,
Adrian! Probably. She is said Adrian. Right. She's also in The Godfather.
Wait, didn't Coppola direct this movie, The Last Showgirl?
Gia Coppola directed it.
Not a Francis Ford child, but a niece?
Think yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so. But yeah. So this is a Coppola production. So I'll say this. This film for me, I think, ends up being like I haven't like rated it on Letterboxd yet because I wanted to talk about it today and then see if my feelings changed or how they shifted. But I would give this movie like a 2.5 stars. But I say this saying there are parts of this movie or elements of this movie that are like 4 or 5 stars for me. But the stuff I did not like or did not work for me stopped me from being able to love this movie. I will say I liked this movie. 2.5 stars is not like a negative. There are many movies I like that I would consider to have that rating, right? So things I really liked in this movie: the sound design. Particularly early on, there's a lot of like overlapping sounds happening where there's like non-diegetic music playing while characters are talking, and it flows into diegetic music, and there's overlapping conversations, and you can hear the sounds of production, like the dance production occurring. I thought that was really beautiful. I thought the film looks really good. I personally like, not everyone's going to feel this way. Mike, for example, really does not like soft focus, this really light color grading. It looks a lot like The Sweet East to me. Like I like that. I like the fuzziness. Yeah. I thought its directing in this kind of grainy, diffuse light. I thought Gia Coppola's directing was lovely. I also am a huge ass sucker for this like classic archetype of a film where there's a delusional woman who like won't or perhaps cannot accept that the external assessments of her value have shifted, right? So this movie kind of is giving like a 2000s versions of Norma Desmond, right? Like you just can't let go of that is a narrative archetype that appeals to me a lot.
I'm also thinking The Substance.
I think thing about the substance is she knows that that's happened and is tortured by the knowledge.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm talking like delusional. Like it does not
doesn't
like
realize.
the folks' opinion have changed.
Gotcha. Okay.
Have not changed internally and cannot accept that other people's perspective have changed. Right.
Yeah, it's the pictures that got smaller.
Yes.
Did I get the line right? I was trying to pull it. Okay.
Yeah. So there's that. I also thought some of the performances in this movie were really great.
Within some of them.
And I think that even within performances, like within individual actors, some of their performance was really great.
Where's old Pammy on that scale?
It pains me to say that there are times in this movie where I think she is crushing it. Like we have not seen. She hasn't had the opportunity to show us this. Then there are times in this movie, like there's one of the first scenes where she's in conflict with her daughter. I thought Pam sucked. I really was not convinced at all. She was giving like someone who's a bad actor, like, or a form of bad acting. I shouldn't say a bad actor, but a kind of bad acting where like their motivations, it's very clear that the person is thinking like, I'm supposed to be upset right now. I'm yelling.
Yeah.
It was giving that for me. And I don't think it's intentional in the performance because there's other times where she's in conflict with people where it didn't feel that way. I found her to be incredibly uneven and I was disappointed by it. I generally like Billie Lourd. I did not think Billie Lourd's performance was very good.
Okay, I was going to ask who else was in it because I don't think I know. She plays her daughter. Okay, because all I want to know is Pamela Anderson in it.
Yeah. Also, Kiernan Shipka is in it, and I'll say this up front. I love Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, okay? That bitch can't act, however. And there's also a really key scene in the movie where, like, you need her to really show up emotionally. And yes, please. And I didn't think that she did.
Yeah. I've only ever seen her as a child in
Mad Men,
and not enough to judge on. But I actually, my wife's watched Sabrina Adventure.
The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
So I've caught her a little here and there. But
yeah, and I really enjoy that show, but I just don't think she's a terribly good actress in it. But it doesn't need to be because it's a freaking show about teenage witches, right? Yeah, I think there's like this very pivotal scene that is like a key moment for Shelley, Pamela Anderson's character, to make a decision for like supporting her friends or to redefine how we might understand her characterization and her like selfishness. And Kiernan Shipka's performance is the impetus for that, and I just did not think she did a good job in that scene. Other elements that I didn't love, like I said, some of the performances, I won't belabor that too much. I didn't think it was horrible. Like, I liked the movie on the whole, but I was like fully ready to love this movie, and I did not. The other thing, which is a writing problem, and is my most significant critique of the film, is that the movie has almost no narrative tension in it. It sets up conflicts. So it sets up conflicts with Shelley and her daughter. It sets up conflicts with Shelley and her job. Will she continue to be able to do this work? It sets up a romantic conflict with Batista. By the way, hottest Batista has ever looked, and I think he's incredibly hot. He looks so fucking hot in this movie. It's crazy. Yes, he has hair. He's a beard. He's like great. Ooh! And maybe, as Mike pointed out, maybe the last time we see Batista in his big ass, like totally ripped self, because he slimmed down a lot in the last year because it's not
Hollywood, baby.
Well, and also it's not like it is very difficult to sustain that level of buffness. He's still ripped. He's just not like WWE ripped.
I feel like maybe he wants to do more interesting acting stuff than like, let's take The Rock, Cena, for example, who's like, he's always going to be ripped because he's always going to do The Rock shit. Right. Whereas I feel like Batista maybe is wanting to do more interesting shit, and maybe being like insanely jacked all the time
doesn't suit that.
Doesn't suit it. Yeah,
for sure. And I would agree. I mean, I've long said that Batista is the best actor of the WWE guys.
We love him.
Yeah, I thought he was very good in this. But so there's like all of these like, relationships or questions about relationships or next steps that Shelley, Pamela Anderson's character has. And the movie just one by one goes like, actually nothing's changing in them, which makes sense. People live lives in that way,
right?
But it just,
but then the tension should come from
the
that
fucking air out of the room in terms of the movie.
Yeah. Now,
I will say, there's a scene at the very end. It's not like the last scene. I think it's a couple of scenes in, but it's the last big scene where Pamela Anderson she's auditioning, and she interacts with the Jason Schwartzman, who is taking auditions. And I think Pamela Anderson's performance in that scene is really good and very powerful and compelling. And that the movie ends in a way, because it ends functionally on that note, has it leaves you in a place where the emotional impact is more there for me. But I was just a little disappointed by some of the performances and by the writing of the film as a whole. Like the micro writing, like the conversation, the dialogue, good. Solid, some really good lines.
Just the overarching, like,
it was just like, it's I felt like the movie wants you to be wrapped up in her fantasy, but the fantasy keeps being punctuated by real life, but then the real life has no consequences.
So it's kind of pointless and interrupting.
We end up back in her fantasy again, which are certainly decisions you can make, but I just didn't think that it went there for me fully.
Who's your favorite Coppola? Do you have a favorite Coppola?
I mean, probably just in terms of the number of times I've seen it, it has to be Francis Ford. I mean, I like, he's not a Coppola name, but, I love Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is the only Coppola I would say that I like. I mean, I don't know him personally, obviously, but in terms of like Francis Ford, I love his movies, but that man obviously has fucking problems.
Yeah, he's a bit of a nutter.
Doesn't treat women well. I mean, if you watch Hearts of Darkness, and his wife is like, I don't know, we're lucky that he's alive. We didn't murder each other, during the filming of this, or that Dennis Hopper didn't murder him, or whatever.
Or murder. Didn't he have like 2 heart attacks or was that Martin Sheen?
That was Martin Sheen.
Okay.
Yeah. Everyone was going to die. Is the point.
I was going to shout out Eleanor as not a favorite Coppola because she didn't, she's not as prolific as the others, but I love Hearts of Darkness so much. And I think she's definitely, I don't know if she ends up getting the director credit. I think she does have the director credit on that, but she like films all the shit in it. And,
I believe she is, because she's the one when it went to Sundance. Like it was her that took it there. But yeah, it's I definitely will be curious to see other things that Gia Coppola makes. And I really hope, my very genuine hope out of this movie is that people give Pamela Anderson more of a shot.
Yeah,
because I would love to see her in other things. I think the hardest thing about this movie is that all of it rests on her. And when she wavers, my commitment to what's happening internally in the world wavers. But lots of gems here, like lots of sparkle, lots of interesting acting choices. I just think there's a few times of particular emotional intensity that I just did not feel quite reach the metric that I was hoping for.
Damn.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to move on to our current events and talk about what's got you either celebrating or living in despair?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I'll be brief and just talk about a bill that is coming up that's, not ideal considering what would have happened with the election. But as many know, recreational marijuana was on the ballot in Florida last election, and though 56% of voting Floridians elected to legalize recreational marijuana in the Sunshine State, Florida's arbitrary rule of 60% needed for constitutional amendments meant that the bill fell short. And though medical marijuana is legal in Florida, because it is still illegal federally, patients can still be fired from their jobs for using legal cannabis. But so far, there have been 2 bills filed, HB 83 filed in the House by Representative Mitch Rosenwald and SB 142 filed in the Senate by Senator Tina Polsky, both of which would make it illegal for government agencies to not hire, fire, or demote medical marijuana users. Obviously not the solution we would have wanted before the election, but at least there's some new proposed protections out there because it's just been too fucking long of people's lives being ruined for ticky-tack bullshit like marijuana possession or, in this case, legal marijuana possession, but people still getting fired and losing their jobs and their houses for something that they have a legal right to. So hopefully those bills will pass. Again, it's just like government agencies and shit that it protects, and also excludes law enforcement agencies, which are still allowed to fire and not hire based on medical marijuana usage in Florida, which is crazy. But yeah, just want to shout that out because it's a little spot of sunshine in a otherwise pretty bleak political landscape at the moment. What about you?
I appreciate that you have any semblance of hope about anything that the legislature
Listen,
will
I
do.
said a little bit. Yeah.
a speck flying, floating in the breeze. Well, I think that, obviously as we near Trump's second inauguration day, that there are a lot of people, understandably, really freaked out. And I think that there are a lot of valid reasons, obviously, for people to be freaked out. But I would also encourage people who are in, relatively stable employment, who are documented, who have health insurance, to think about the people that are going to be targeted immediately are going to be undocumented immigrants. That's what he did last time. I think it's going to be a lot fucking worse this time because there aren't going to be any, there's no handcuffs, right? There were some Republican-led even handcuffs last time. All of that is gone.
Yeah, see who he's putting in the cabinet.
Right. There is no resistance internally. And so as part of that, been thinking a lot about farm workers in Florida, since we're in Florida. And because there's also been kind of a series of incidents and also policy developments over the last year that have made things even worse for this particularly vulnerable population in Florida. So Tampa Bay Times recently, like in the last week, released an investigation into a situation that happened last May in Ocala, where a guy who was inebriated in some fashion ran into a bus carrying undocumented workers and killed 8 people and injured many, many more. And then like falling down that rabbit hole and then seeing like, oh, a couple of years ago, basically the same thing happened in Miami. Like this is a reoccurring problem. And then reflecting on the fact that, in Florida, last legislative session, they actively made it illegal for municipalities to require heat protection for workers, right?
It's crazy.
Like as of, July 1st of last year, it's not allowed. They can't there's localities are not permitted to do that. And we know there are, other classes of workers that are impacted by this, but overwhelmingly in Florida, we're talking about farm laborers being affected. And then there's like all the other classic shit that is just baseline, right? Of like classic labor trafficking issues like withholding of passports and documents. In fact, that was relevant in both of the car crash cases that I mentioned earlier. That in the United States, there are no overtime limits for farm laborers. Like farm labor is cut out intentionally as an exemption. So you could work 100 hours a week in farm labor and not be guaranteed any overtime pay. And with the immigration crackdowns that frankly have already started, but anticipate getting a lot worse, just want us to think about how all of these systems are interconnected and who are the people that are going to suffer most, and also how that affects food access, right? Like all the things that are downstream of our farm workers, farm laborers being repressed and arrested and deported. So I know that's not like a singular thing. I'm just kind of thinking about this constellation of problems. And as we go into Trump's second administration. I think it's important that we keep an eye on what's going on with our farm laborers.
Yeah, it's bleak. I'll end it again, but
yeah,
it's bleak. Well, at least we got Linda McMahon in charge of the DOE. And this time we're not going to have moderating voices like Kimberly Guilfoyle there to hold it back.
The Connecticut Board of Education didn't want her. We certainly don't need her. Like at the federal level.
The Matt Gaetz one was crazy, but the Linda McMahon one to me is like the wildest one of like.
It's like the lack of. I mean, there's so many things happening there, but it's like obviously the lack of.
Experience,
expertise and experience, but also on top of that, and I'm not saying, actually, you know what I am? Rich women should be held to account for their husband's crimes. People are always like, that's sexist. I'm like, sure, but they're bound together via legal contract unless she's trying to leave him.
And her specifically.
She fucking sucks, okay? Write it down. Fuck that bitch.
Yeah. And Triple H.
Yeah. All of them. The whole family.
I have not watched the Raw on Netflix yet, but I am very much looking forward to it because
they paid so many famous people to be there. It was disgusting.
I am enjoying, sorry to do a quick change of subject. I am enjoying the existential crisis that Hulk Hogan is having, trying to convince himself that the fans still like him because he got booed like mightily, and he's now come out and said multiple things. The industry is
reporting, like the industry. So fucking wrestling reporting is a crock of shit, and those people should generally not be able to call themselves journalists. There are some people that actually behave like journalists, but many of them do not and are just extensions of, whatever promotion they affix themselves to. And there was like all this bullshit wrestling journalism that was like, he's not mad. He doesn't care if people boo him.
Clearly. Sure. There was one interview that resurfaced that I think was several months back where an interview asked him, like, do you think that the WWE fans will give you another chance? And he's like, hey, if they reevaluate how they feel about Chris Benoit, then why not me, or something to that effect. And I was like, that's the category
you want to be in. Family annihilator.
Hey, don't get so mad at me. I'm like Chris Benoit, like is kind of his defense, which is
I wish you would Chris Benoit you and only yourself.
And honestly, well, this might be too spicy to say.
Really? Whatever you're about to say is spicier than what I just said. To be clear, I am not saying you should.
Of the two, in my mind, one is a more sympathetic figure in that their brain was scrambled and broken.
Oh, I'm sure that Hulk Hogan has CTE, but I'm also certain that he was using the N-word far before CTE was relevant. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Life, Chris Benoit's a tragic case all around, whereas Hulk Hogan, a lot of his demise is kind of his own making.
I will never forgive him for one, being a racist piece of shit, and two, for dismantling Gawker. Never ever will I forgive
because he was
those offenses. Fuck off.
Yeah. I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I can't not say it when it comes up. But there's a moment in the Hulk Hogan sex tape, post coitus, where he says something to the effect of, "Oh, shouldn't have had that sushi," which is great. Also, I'm sure I mentioned this too because this is just another what a piece of shit he is. But remember when his son paralyzed people? And I don't think the kid didn't die, I don't think, but he is like in a permanent vegetative state.
His former friend from Reckless Driving. Wasn't he racing?
They were like racing and he was being an asshole and he crashed his car and his friend is in like a permanent vegetative state. And there was some jailhouse calls released of Hulk Hogan talking to his son where he says like, essentially like, oh, yeah, can you imagine what he must have been mixed up in for God to have done this to him? Talking about the friend that his son paralyzed, which is a top tier piece of shit thing to say.
I hope that thought echoes through his mind every time someone boos him. It won't.
Yeah, clearly, because did not even get close to coming through his mind.
I can wish it.
Yeah. But anyways, are we ready to stop talking about depressing stuff and talk about a fun movie?
Yeah, let's let Hairspray
Hell
run wild on
let
its
Hairspray
brothers.
wash over us. Yeah, brother. You want to introduce our movie?
Sure. So I'm going to set down this cup of coffee that I picked up at an opportune time. Okay. There are lots of angles from which one could approach this seminal piece of, I said with love, mainstreamed trash. But before we dig into the content of the film, I'd like to illustrate some context. So let's talk about the racial segregation that sets the scene for Hairspray. As a side note, the facts and stats in this write-up are drawn from the iconic sociological text American Apartheid, Segregation and the Making of the Underclass, which is a 1993 monograph written by Douglas S. Massey and Nancy A. Denton. Yes, you might say, wow, that book came out a long time ago, but we're talking about a movie that was made in the 80s and is about the 1960s, yes. So it's relevant. It's important to consider there that the two temporal spaces that Hairspray occupies, the early 1960s depicted on screen and the late 1980s in which it was made, Baltimore is an incredibly violently and cruelly segregated city throughout that entire time span. When we talk about residential segregation, social scientists typically use a metric called the dissimilarity index. This number, which ranges from 0 to 100, represents the percentage of people of a certain group. So in the instances I'll be talking about here, that group would be Black folks in Baltimore, who would have to move across census tracts, basically change where they live, in order to be uniformly distributed with other groups, or said another way, fully integrated. I don't think this is news to anyone listening to this podcast, I fucking hope, but segregation matters. It's a matter of, on the most basic level, right, dignity and respect. But it's also a matter of access to resources, jobs, services, and opportunities, as all of these things are spatially organized. Separate can never be equal when the money pools along racially segregated lines. John Waters is a silly, perverse man, but he's also a man raised in Baltimore, one of the most racially segregated cities in the entire country. Hairspray is a laugh riot, but under that chuckle is a wound. In 1910, the Baltimore City Council passed an ordinance officially codifying separate neighborhoods for Black and white families. This firm color line was maintained even with major population shifts during the Great Migration. So for context, the dissimilarity index for Baltimore in 1950 was 91.3. Okay, again, 100 would be basically complete segregation. So functionally, nearly complete segregation. The population of the center city of Baltimore became virtually all Black in that time. And progress was not given over time. In 1980, right, back towards, we think about when the film was made, only 8.5% of Black Baltimore residents lived in the suburbs. Hypersegregation is defined as a situation where a city displays at least 4 of 5 different characteristics of segregation. 1, unevenness, where a group is overrepresented in some areas, underrepresented in others. 2, isolation, where a group is very rarely shares a neighborhood with any other racial or ethnic group. Number 3, clustering, the relationship of segregated neighborhoods to each other, i.e. the segregated neighborhoods are really closely clustered together, or does it resemble more like a checkerboard? We hear checkerboard chick, right, in Hairspray. 4, concentration, small area versus dispersed across the city. And 5, centralization, are folks segregated in the urban core versus along the periphery of the city. Baltimore in 1980 exceeded indexes of 70 in all 5 categories. Okay, the wound was not healed. And Baltimore is emblematic, but it's not alone. By the time Hairspray came out in 1988, 1/3 of all Black Americans were living under conditions of intense racial segregation. John Waters comes through and sticks his finger in the gash. Is it effective? Is it fun? Is it politically salient? Let's discuss.
Yeah, I think it is all three of those. But I also wanted to ask, because Baltimore's still extremely segregated. Do you know what the like index number is today?
I do not. I could look it up though.
But I imagine it's probably still on the higher end of the major metropolitan cities. But yeah, let's talk about initial thoughts, and I'll frame mine more from a like filmmaking perspective, specifically because I have been reading that Tarantino book, and he says something in it that made me think of this, which he talks about how the 80s was a shitty time for like studio movies and genre movies. And the way Tarantino sees it, he sees that the explosion of genre movies and like fun, subversive, weird movies in the 70s led to every studio wanting a genre movie, but with the edges shaved off, kind of like safe for, the family and all that. So the 80s were just riddled with these kind of boring genre movies that lacked any kind of like verve or spice. Whereas the studios wanted a Death Wish or a Dirty Harry or a Wild Bunch, they ended up with these kind of morality tales that echoed back to the Hays Code with like, the bad guys getting theirs, or with the clear hierarchy of rewarding the good, punishing the bad. So in Tarantino's estimation, that meant a loss of dynamic, morally complex characters. And he's speaking in generalities, and he specifically shouts out a number of directors who did, in fact, continue to make interesting genre picks and stuff in the 80s, like Lynch, De Palma, Cronenberg, among others. He doesn't mention John Waters, but I think he should, because I think Hairspray is a really good example of a director who was kind of had this mythic gonzo DIY style in the 60s and the 70s, approaching a more like commercial space in the 80s. And, I'm not going to say Hairspray is shaving any edges off, but if you've seen Pink Flamingos and then you watch Hairspray, there's definitely he's a tonal shift that he is walking, because, Pink Flamingos is Pink Flamingos and Hairspray is a PG rating. So, but he does it in a really good way that I think kind of echoes what Tarantino is saying, those directors that kind of kept their edge while still working in the kind of like moralizing Reagan era of the 80s. So anyways, that was on my mind because I was reading that book and I wanted to say that. But I did want to ask, do you remember the first time you saw this movie? Because I don't really, but I know I've seen it. I hadn't seen it in so long, but I know I'd watched it multiple times in my teenage years, but I don't remember the first time, and I was curious if you do.
I don't remember the first time, no, but this is also one of those movies, along with, like I brought up before, like Videodrome, that like my mom just used to watch all the time. So I saw it at a very young age.
I don't know if your mom used to watch, I don't know if I ever knew that your mom would watch Videodrome all the time.
Oh yeah, that's like I was there. The Fly, there's like several Cronenberg films which is so yeah, it's very funny. That's cool. My mother doesn't make a lot of sense, to be honest. But
that's like my mom, but with episodes of the Andy Griffith Show.
But so no, I don't know the first time because I saw it. It was one of those where, you'd watch like a portion of it.
Yeah.
All the time. Also, I just want to say, looks like the 2000 data for Baltimore is a 71.8. So dissimilarity index, so still high, but an improvement. And then the only thing I could find from 2020 is white versus non-white, not white black specifically. Uh-huh. So could be artificially decreased relative to what we're talking about here was 59. So things have improved somewhat in Baltimore, at least on this axis, since some of the other data we were talking about, contextualizing the film specifically. But yes, I used to watch this movie as a child.
Oh yeah, yeah. I definitely I have memories of my dad loves this movie, which is strange for my dad because he's kind of like. He's got dad tastes in movies. Sorry if he's listening. He'd probably be offended by that. But, he's like Saving Private Ryan, Gladiator, that kind of stuff. And my dad fucking loves Hairspray. My dad loves John Waters in general. It's very odd to me that this was a dad movie. But I remember seeing this movie and then my dad putting it on anytime it would be on cable and anything like that. So I saw it a bunch as a kid, but haven't in a minute. But
Yeah, I think for me, it's like I didn't see any other John Waters films until like late high school when I started really kind of stuff we've talked about before of like, I'm going to try and see the weird stuff, you know, and you're Googling things that like they're eating shit, you know, I better look that up. So probably, you know, I'd probably seen this movie or portions of this movie dozens of times before I had any understanding that John Waters was a figure outside of this film specifically.
So let's talk about old JW, because I love him. First off, I want to just say that like he's like one of those directors that you can just get a still frame and be like, that's a John Waters movie. There's just God, what's the word? A whimsy to everything he does, even like the really raunchy stuff. There's just like his movies exist in a universe that are all his own. I know that sounds kind of corny, but like I do feel like you can put on any one of his movies and it just looks like a John Waters movie. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just to say John Waters is also one of those figures which when I did learn more about him as an individual later as a teenager, is that he is very inspiring to me as, you know, someone who's interested in creative production of various types, of just someone who is like, I'm just gonna make shit. Like you actually can't, no one can tell me that I can't make shit. Me and my friends are gonna go, Yeah, and I do think that that's a really important kind of figure to be present and aware of as young people who are interested in making things. Think, you know, there's a lot more of that, I think, in music, because like you can just like have a guitar and like start a band in your garage with your friends, but like seeing people who were like, no, we made movies and then they played them in a movie theater with my gang of weirdos. I think he's very inspiring that way.
Yeah, I feel the same. Did I ever told you that I met him?
Oh, what was it when he spoke at FSU?
Yeah, it was not like I just bumped into him on the streets.
Yeah, I didn't meet him, but yes, I was.
Did you go to that? So it was.
Saw him speak.
Probably.
I mean,
I was still in college, so this was 2009, 2010.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when did you graduate?
2010.
Yeah. Okay. So it must have been. It must have been 2010.
Touring with a book he had written. I think maybe that car sick one about like him hitchhiking across the country, but it was like very much a John Waters experience. He just got up there, and he walked around
a lot.
He walked around. Yeah, he paced around. He was funny. He was charming, and then he kind of waited around. And if you stood in line and went up and said, "Hi, Mr. Waters." I mean, that's what I did. "Hi, Mr. Waters. Thank you for coming." But he was very nice and very gracious. And it was like one of those times where you could get let down when you meet somebody that you like respect and admire. And then when you see that they're kind of like that image you have in your head of them, like sweet and nice and creative and funny, it was just, it just solidified that I liked him. But do we want to continue our John Waters love session? Do our top 3 John Waters movies? Hell yeah. What's your number 3?
Polyester.
I haven't seen Polyester.
I have definitely brought this up before, but I love Douglas Sirk. And John Waters, I mean, very explicitly is like, it's his own. I hesitate to say it's lampooning exactly, because I wouldn't say that it's all like dripping in irony, right? Like it is genuinely his version of a Sirkian melodrama. So I love it for that reason. And I think it is, you know, it has a lot of the common themes of his other work, kind of poking fun at and teasing out the gross, filthy and absurd elements of domestic life. Also, it's another, you know, divine at the center.
Yeah. I'm going to change my number 3 because it was Hairspray, but we're about to talk about that for a long time. And I want to talk about another one, which is another one that is kind of like poking fun at domestic life. And I think I've probably talked about before, but it's Serial Mom, which is like basically all 3 of my favorites are ones that I watched as a teenager and loved as a teenager. And that my like top 3 have never changed, just like the nostalgia of it. But I fucking loved Serial Mom. I feel like I saw that before I saw that might be the first one that I saw, and I didn't know it was John Waters. It was just on TV. And I was like, what the hell is this? and I watched it and loved it, and then would just watch it on cable all the time, and then subsequently learned it was John Waters. But if you are uninitiated, it stars Kathleen Turner as a like
one of the greatest voices on a woman of all time.
Yes, very great. She plays like a kind of quintessential like domestic housewife mom in suburbia, except that she's got like anger issues and just goes on a killing spree of like annoying teenagers in the town, and it's very funny. Yeah, it's great. I love it. What about you? What's number 2?
I'm gonna say Crybaby. I think Crybaby is like the most distilled version of all of the things that I like most about John Waters films, combined with some of his best production value. And you don't need good production value, obviously, to have a strong John Waters films. But when I think about some of his later work, even Serial Mom, which I like a lot, but where he started to get a little bit more money, and some studios did start to give him a little bit of money, and you take away a little bit of that campy joy of kind of the gap between, and John Waters has talked about defining camp this way himself, the gap between what you're trying to do and what your resources enable you to do. Once that's kind of removed, there's sometimes I don't love some of his later work that is just the filth without
Dirty Shame or whatever.
Where it's like the filth is there, but there's not as much heart in terms of executing the production. I think because there's just more money involved. And to me, Crybaby is like perfect Goldilocks, happy medium, like just brilliant execution. And, you know, obviously, I love Grease, right? I love like the 1950s or early 60s aesthetic. And I think that is, again, his film where that's most beautifully executed. Big fan of Crybaby.
Oh, yeah. My number 2 is maybe one of the later career ones, and I haven't seen this one in so long, and maybe it doesn't hold up. Maybe it is that one that's just raunch for raunch, but I loved it as a teenager and thought it was hilarious, which was Pecker with Edward Furlong, which is really hard to find now. Like, I was trying to buy it, and I cannot find, like on eBay, it's like $100 for a DVD copy. Really hard to find, but I love it. And it is, it's Edward Furlong plays like this kid, this kind of like pervy kid that has a camera and just likes taking pictures of shit, and then ends up like rubbing elbows with the like highfalutin art society all through a John Waters lens. And I love it. And there's a lot of really great one-liners. I still say Hail Mary full of grace, which is what his mom's parakeet, he had trained his mom's parakeet to say the Lord's Prayer or whatever. No, the mom had trained the parakeet to say the Lord's Prayer. But I love Pecker. It's very funny. What about you? What's your favorite?
I mean, Hairspray. We don't have to
belabor it.
Yeah, we don't have to belabor it. So I'll just talk about, rather than talking about the movie itself or the content of the movie, I will say that, you know, I think there are a lot of reasons that I love movies, but many of them are wrapped up in my mom and my relationship with my mom. And I feel very fortunate that, you know, my mom is not like a cinephile. Like I guarantee she's probably never seen anything by Carousel, you know, or whatever. But there is fun, funky stuff, especially from the 80s, that she introduced to me. And so I have a strong emotional attachment to the movie. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I also have a strong emotional attachment to the shitty movie musical.
Oh, we will talk about it, yeah. I do not have I've seen it one time, so I do not have a strong emotional attachment.
Though that's actually not related to my mother. I'll talk about it in a bit. But so, you know, I think that Hairspray for me, it's like, you know, I have the emotional attachment connected with my mother in my childhood. It was a gateway for, you know, investigating more John Waters, and then just broadly a gateway for understanding, again, that kind of perspective on creative fulfillment and being able to undertake projects that don't have to like neatly fit into a box, and they can be queer and filthy and weird and talk about power and inequality while also being fun and silly at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite is this is a thing you talk about often, and I think even mentioned on this episode, but the idea of like when we were teenagers finding the weird fucked up movies that you only hear about. And I remember the first time I saw this one was like, that kind of like movie nerd thing that you're in a club that not a lot of people know about because you saw this weird fucked up movie that you love. And it was the first time I know that's very snobby, but I'm putting myself back in teenage brain. But the first time I saw Pink Flamingos was like, oh, I've been let in on a secret that only a few of us know about. And I love it. It's shocking and disgusting and gross in all the most beautiful ways. And a lot of the same players from, well, at least two. I haven't said a lot, but now Mink Stole and Divine. But I feel like there's at least one or two others that also pop up in Hairspray. But yeah, Pink Flamingos was like the first like big like shock comedy, like gross out thing that I remember watching and just being captivated by how weird it was. And I still love it. And it's still, my list is very much nostalgia based, but I'll stand by it. But I love Pink Flamingos.
Why not be driven by nostalgia?
Honestly.
We're talking about John Waters.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, Hairspray is nostalgia driven itself. But do we want to get into the plot of Hairspray?
Sure. Why don't you walk us through the rough outline? We
don't have to spend too much on it because I think this is a pretty widely known movie and we kind of covered it anyways, but it takes place in Baltimore in the 1960s, right? Beginning of the 1960s. It takes place in
1963.
1963. Where there is the Corny Collins dance show that's kind of the number one show in Baltimore that all the teens watch, that as integration is happening around the country, the Corny Collins show begins to integrate itself as well, or attempt to. And our main character, Tracy Turnblad. Edna is Divine.
Yeah.
Tracy Turnblad gets a spot on the Corny Collins show as a dancer and kind of leads this, kind of finds herself the figurehead of this movement to integrate the Corny Collins show and kind of show the old heads of Baltimore how to be more progressive and accepting, and it's in a very fun way. Was that a good brief? I didn't want to spend too long on it, but I feel like that captures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story about the integration of a dance show, and also the ways in which, in a very classic John Waters sense, other forms of deviant, like people that are deviant, marked as deviant by a broader white upper class society, find solace and fellowship in each other. Also, I would say is a part and parcel of that.
Yeah. So let's just go down rather than do the plot walkthrough. Just kind of take some of the themes and the chunks. But first, I do want to talk about the cast because the cast is incredible. First off, Divine is so fucking good in this. Like, there is I don't know. I always, whenever I think of Divine, I think like Pink Flamingos, just very boisterous and loud and in your face.
Kill everyone.
Yeah, but there is that element of Divine in this, but she's also plays it with like, there's a vulnerability and like I don't know, the scene where she goes and gets the dress and like there's like a sweetness.
Divine is absolutely playing this as like Divine is playing a mom, as opposed to like
John Travolta playing a mom.
I think that John Travolta plays the character just fine, to be honest. No, but what I mean is that like it could be very self-referential of like, because Divine, I'm struggling to remember his real name right now, but is not a trans woman, like very distinctly in his own writing, speaking, and John Waters talking about him, like he was a drag queen. Yeah. He's a gay man who sometimes dressed up as Divine, and he actually felt, again, according to like some interviews and videos and John Waters talking about it, felt some like chagrin at the fact that he was not known, like that Divine was his only public persona, basically. But my point is, it would be relatively easy to play it as like a drag queen is the mom, right? A drag queen is mom, and that's not at all. He is playing it as he is mom through Divine, right? Like as if Divine was just mom. So without like the layer of irony. Now, of course, like as audience, as viewers, we can see the humor in some of these line readings and stuff, but I do think he's playing it relatively straight.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like the line readings that I love so much are because it seems so like a mom. I don't know. It's just like the one line that I rewound a million times is, I don't know, Divine's voice is just really good too. But the line that I rewound is when she's watching the show at the beginning and Divine says, "Can you turn that racket down? I'm trying to hire me here." And like the voice just it shifts so quickly that it makes me laugh so much.
Yeah, I also love how she keeps referring to her diet pills as essentially like they could do a wide variety of different things, and obviously playing up the extent to which, especially in the mid 20th century, diet pills were just straight up amphetamines.
Yeah.
So that there are a lot of line readings around that, like where she's like my diet pill is wearing off.
Yeah, but it's again,
like
it's never like the humor is that a drag queen is playing it. It's just that Divine's a good performer and the performance is funny.
His name is Harris Milstead.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that. But yes, I do think obviously, again, there are elements that are like the delivery or whatever, where us knowing that Divine is a drag queen enhances the humor. But I don't think the performer is himself relying on that for the humor of his delivery, which I appreciate.
Divine has definitely done that in other movies, like Pink Flamingos, for example. Also, okay, there's some weird cameos in this movie. There is one that I never knew that this is who this was. And first off, I went down a rabbit hole of like, how old could this person be? But did you know that, yes, one of them that I paused early on. Josh Charles is in this movie as like a dancer background, and I spotted him from a distance, and I paused to ask my wife, and then there's a close up on him, and like 2 seconds later, and I was like, I could have just waited. But the really weird one is, do you know who plays Amber, the popular girl that's like Tracy's rival?
I did not until I saw your note, so I'm going to let you deliver this because it blew my mind.
Yes, it is the pop singer Vitamin C, who has a song that comes out a solid decade plus later, when I was like, okay, because the song we all know because it's played at every high school graduation. It's the stupid As We Go.
Do they still do that?
And maybe not high school graduations, but like I've definitely heard it at like events where like,
oh, I mean, there's like a 20-year period where it constantly was. I just mean like I have no idea if like a 17-year-old graduating this year, is that still part of their ecosystem?
I feel like maybe like if there's like
I have to ask,
like a dance after the graduation, they might play. This is
one of my favorite things about being a overseeing student staff is sometimes I have questions like this where I'm just like, let me, and not that it's representative, of course, but go to my student staff and say, hello, are you aware of this? And they will return the favor back to me sometimes, like being like, do you remember when 9/11 happened? That was a question I was asked.
I've gotten that
like,
one too.
Yes, I do. And they want to talk through that. So I'll be happy to bring this to the table. Do you guys know the graduation song by Vitamin C?
Okay, so then I was like, oh my God, that's Vitamin C. And then I thought, when the fuck did the graduation song come out? Because it's like 1999 or 2000, which means Vitamin C was 30 years old when she recorded that song. It's like,
wow.
We think about tomorrow like the rest of our lives. I was like, you are too old for this. This is ridiculous. But yeah, that's Vitamin C.
I bet she made a lot of money off that song.
Oh my God. Of course. Yeah. She was. Okay. So, producer Chantal tells us that she was a songwriter for years, but that is crazy. I had no idea that was her.
Yeah.
And then there's two other musical cameos in it. Pia Zadora and Rick Ocasek in that hilarious scene where they go and like meet the Beatniks, and they're like just the most annoying artiste couple.
Oh yeah. The Cars are major fixture of not even of my childhood. I still listen to the Cars a lot, frankly. And so that would be kind of one of the classic like mom moments, would be being like, that's who sings the songs that dad's always playing.
But as any other standouts in the cast, I mean, everyone is really, really good in it. But
this, not necessarily, well, I'll just say this. I got the Videodrome Criterion for Christmas. Obviously a movie I've seen a cajillion times. Very happy to own a hard copy of it now. But because I just received it, rewatched it shortly after watching this. And I need to know, the people need to know, why wasn't Debbie Harry in more movies. I mean, theoretically she could be now, but it's just like, it's so funny to me that she has relatively, well, obviously in one movie, very prominent, and this one less so, but still, she's a great comedic actress. She's good timing in this. She's really funny when she delivers the line that she was Miss Softcrab of 1945. It really gets me. And she handles, again, plays it straight, plays really absurd, silly things with a straight face. And I'm like, why wasn't she in more stuff?
Yeah.
Like, the people need to know.
I struggle to think of anything else other than those two movies.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's some of my favorite shit of all time. Where are you, Debbie?
Come back to us. Also, I don't know the actress's name, but to me, the funniest bit in the whole movie is when the mom, the other girl's mom, I don't remember her name, but the mom that's like very... The girl is
Penny.
Penny.
And her mom is Prudence.
Prudence. And her mom is very worried that she is hanging out with some black kids in Baltimore and goes to track her down and like wanders into a black neighborhood where like nothing is happening. Everyone is
hysterically screaming.
Is just going about their lives, but every black person she bumps into, she is more and more afraid. And someone's
like trying to help her, and she's like,
"Howdy, ma'am!"
Fucking shit.
And it is like so funny, and it goes on for so long, and it's just like a great. It's so funny. That's a great scene.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. You know, John Waters is really good at sticking his finger in the eye of,
for sure. Those kind of like white people, the like pearl clutching white people.
Yeah, it's something that I would like to raise. We don't always, I mean, we usually touch on, but we don't always spend a lot of time talking about like actually the filmmaking techniques and whatnot. But another reason I love this movie so much is that John Waters' direction is, I think, the strongest of any of his films. He uses all kinds of fun transitions. There's like diagonal side wipes, and then there's like the like quick pan in that turns into a circle that only highlights like a person's face. There's like a lot of dynamic camera work and fun transitions that feels very of the period, like very early 60s. But also is a little goofy and really emphasizes I don't know. I feel like it harmonizes with the television aspect of what's going on, right?
It
like on screen.
That,
like it's using early 60s television techniques to make a film that predominantly revolves around an early 60s television show. So I just want to bring that up.
So let's talk about the music in Hairspray, because the music is great. There's a bunch of great scenes around it. And I know that this is your favorite era of music. So
it is.
What do you got to say about the music?
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, it's one of the things I really enjoy about the movie is I love hearing this music. I love the dancing style that is done to it, and the fact that it's foregrounded while the movie is, really about these political and social issues, I think is delightful. And
with some legit musical of the time. Now I'm blanking on her name, but the woman that plays
Motormouth
Mabel, I almost said Maybelline, is Ruth Brown, and then the guy that is playing at the club is also like an old
Toussaint McCall.
Yeah. And that scene, that one got me, because there's a really beautiful moment where like they give him a few minutes in the club, like the camera lingers on him, lets him perform a little bit, and then it cuts to what's going on outside, and you can still hear him inside, but now there's like a dude just walking down the alleyway like singing to the song at the same time, and when they meet, it's just a really good like moment of filmmaking. But yeah, I really like how the music is both the centerpiece and the background at the same time of like the whole setting of the movie. Well,
and it is essential. It cannot be separated from the meaning of what's happening, because this is something that is obviously still a pertinent problem today, which is that the music evades segregation before the people who produce it are permitted to.
Yeah.
Right. So we see on the all white ass Corny Collins is such a good.
There's so many good names.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Corny Collins show that they're listening to music made by Black people, that it's a central part of the discussion. We hear Edna and the woman who is coming to pick up her laundry make reference to the music that they're listening to and the fact that it's changing the minds of their young white people, right? And so the music makes inroads before the folks who are making it are acknowledged as humans and able to be present and share spaces and fully benefit from the fruits of their labor. So it's, it's great music, and also it is very meaningful, both in terms of what's happening internal to the film, but also we continue to see this happen now, right? We know that overwhelmingly, like, young white men are the predominant consumers of hip hop made by Black men. That dynamic hasn't changed.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's unfortunately evergreen and essential to the story that John Waters is telling.
Yeah, and I think John Waters is really good at being a white guy, trafficking in Black art without, trying to refocus it on white folks, if that makes sense. Like, yes, the main characters are white, but there's a reverence to the way he treats the musicians. I mean, just having the real musicians from the era in the movie itself. But I don't know, just the way the movie, I was struck by the way the movie treats them. It is very, it's tender in a way that I wouldn't expect in modern movies, where it might be trafficking in what's popular for the cultural cachet without giving a lot of thought to the people that are making it, or, like you were saying, the people that weren't even allowed to be acknowledged at the time. But I think John Waters does a pretty good job with that. And actually, it might be, when we get to it, my complaint about the remake and the musical. But we'll get to that shortly.
Yeah, I think that's, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I do think in the musical, compared to the movie, it's still a little true, right? Or still, it is still true and it's still relevant. But Tracy is totally, entirely the hero of the story and the protagonist of the story in the movie musical.
Yeah.
Whereas I think there is a little bit more just straight up ensemble feeling to the film.
Yeah. Especially, the first half, it is, I mean, she's probably still the main character, but it's so much. There's so many other personalities and people, and it does feel like an ensemble. And then for the last 30 minutes, it becomes her story to kind of command or whatever. But yeah. Well, let's talk about the specifics of the integration and some of the stuff we see. Especially, we see the relationship between Penny and Seaweed becomes kind of a linchpin in it. Seaweed being a young Black kid and Penny being a white girl.
And Seaweed is the son of Motormouth Mabel.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just I think that, again, we kind of go back to that idea that John Waters loves to stick his finger in the eye of folks.
Yeah, because it's Penny's mom that she's looking for her when she's out with Seaweed. Whenever there's that hilarious scene of her
Motormouth Mabel's record shop, where they're dancing, and that the idea that interracial relationships particularly inflame the biases of Penny's family and stoke white fears about the intentions and outcomes of integration, right? There is a way in which this movie is setting up oh, you're afraid of integration because what's going to happen is young white women are going to, date, have sex with, etc., Black men, right? That's encapsulating the underlying fear, right? What's the implication of the fears of white people in segregation?
Yeah.
There are other aspects of it, right? Of course, economic threat. But, right, one of the things that John Waters is teasing out here is that white folks fear integration because they fear interracial relationships.
Yeah.
And, I always like to bring in a social movement perspective where possible. And this part of the movie had me thinking about, there's a great book, just published in 2006, is written by a social movement scholar named Winifred Brennies, called The Trouble Between Us, An Uneasy History of White and Black Women in the Feminist Movement. And I was thinking about it because on the most basic level, right, when we think about racism and segregation and these fears and threats of white people, I would say especially white men, but as embodied in this film, white women, is that interracial relationships are good. Of course, we want people to be crossing the quote unquote color line and to be united in form. And that is, of course, the case. Everyone should be acknowledged as an equal human, and love should transcend that. But the reason why I wanted to bring up this book is that I think it raises a very interesting, that question is thornier, particularly for the time period depicted in the movie, than a very liberal perspective might occupy. And so one of the things that this book talks about is problematizing interracial relationships from a political efficiency perspective. And basically, there's a whole chapter of this book where Black feminists talk about how white women feminists were jeopardizing the work of both the civil rights movement and the feminist movement by pursuing relationships with Black men in the Deep South. And that a lot of the Black women who were interviewed, who were activists, talked about this idea of individual liberty versus collective sacrifice, which is not to say that love is not important across racial lines, but these women were conceiving of themselves as being part of what they called the Emmett Till generation, right? And so we think about SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, during Freedom Summer, coaching participants to avoid sexual relationships due to them being bad for public relations. And so I just think there's, obviously we're in a different era now, but when we think about the early 1960s as depicted in this movie, and we see that there's collective action happening in the film, right? Ultimately they're mobilizing to try and produce segregation. And because John Waters is, of course, trying to tease out hypocrisy, the absurdity of racism, right? They're yes, we're going to pursue these interracial relationships and have them be the wedge that opens the door for segregation, for integration to be pursued. But the actual activists at the time had a much more complex view of interracial relationships, is just my point, right? Which is not to say that people shouldn't have interracial relationships, but that strategically sometimes in the context of the 1960s, people were making different decisions to try and protect their social movements. So the idea being long-term integration is only possible if you do not have white women and Black men walking down the street holding hands in the Deep South, where we're fighting to get voter registration for Black people. Right. So I just wanted to raise that because this movie is not about social movement history, right? But it is about integration in the 1960s. And this is a classic social movement text that I find to be very instructive. And it's another, as is often true, instance where Black feminists raise questions that white feminists often don't even think of or ignore. Right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about these remakes, these adaptations and remakes. First, the musical version, and then in 2007, a remake of the 88 movie, but with the musical version woven in. Also, how do you like both the musical? Have you seen both? I imagine you have, the musical and the film of the musical.
Yes,
I have too. But I've only seen the stage musical somewhat recently, maybe in the last. They did it at FSU in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and that's where I saw it. But how do you feel about them?
Yeah, I mean, I like musicals, and I tend to feel like even a bad musical is a good musical. So there's that. But also, this isn't a bad musical.
Joker, Folie à Deux.
I have not watched that. So if I haven't seen it, it can't be assimilated into my role. Okay,
that's a bad one. But that's not even a real musical. It's fucking.
I'll just say this: the only musical I can ever think of, like literally ever think of, that I personally watched that I was upset by, was The Addams Family. Jesse and I went to go see The Addams Family when they put it on at FSU. I don't know, 10 years ago, whatever, 8, 9, whatever years ago. And it pissed me off because Morticia is a controlling bitch who doesn't want Wednesday to have any fun or like live her life. And I'm like, that's so off character. Why would you do that? That's the literally only time I can think of where I didn't like a musical. And it was simply because of Morticia. I like people singing. I love the classic. A musical is a musical because it's about suspension of reality, where spectacle can do something that reality could not do. Yeah. Right. And I think that the songs in Hairspray are really good. I quite like them. I do like the change up in the musical of having Little Inez win the competition. Because one, I think it just narratively is more interesting in terms of like subversion of expectation. Also, she is, it works with the themes of the film because in the musical version, and we see a little bit of it in the movie, but it's teased out in the musical version, Little Inez teaches Tracy dances, right? So in the movie version, Tracy then co-ops those dances in order to succeed. But in the musical, Little Inez honestly, at the end of the day, wins the crown for her contributions. So I do like that.
Yeah, that is a nice little fix.
You know, I like that.
Change.
I also like that we see more of Hardy Har.
Oh my God, I love the Hardy Har joke shop. The Hardy Hars. What is Jerry Stiller has a line? He's like, do you think it's not tough business counting fake poops all day? Or whatever he screams about.
Yeah.
That's a good
So we get
too.
to see a little bit more of Hardy Har in the movie, musical version, which I like. But I do think that the film or the movie, like the movie musical adaptation, does just take Tracy as like the protagonist from beginning to end until Lil Inez wins. And then it's like, a misdirection. But.
Yeah. And I think that's my issue with it. Look, I haven't seen the movie musical since it came out in 2007. And back then I was probably not as into musicals as I am now. Not to say I'm definitely not as versed in them as you are, but I would definitely be more open to enjoying one than maybe 15 years ago. That said, I agree that making Tracy more of the protagonist does start to teeter on in the remake, kind of the like white savior, like Tracy Turnblad is going to stop segregation in Baltimore. And I think that strikes kind of a weird tone. And I know this came up earlier, I just don't like John Travolta in that movie. I'm sorry.
You don't have to be sorry. I'm not offended.
It's too much of a like a pastiche. And like, for me, it's just too much of a guy that I found him annoying. Like I just want to be like, you know what you're doing. Stop this. Like the whole time. Because he's like, whereas much as we were talking about Divine is just a mom, I feel like John Travolta is like, I gotta beat Divine. Like I gotta ramp it up a little bit, and I find him a bit annoying in the movie.
That's fair. I mean, I think that Travolta is successful in it because he is also he's definitely not playing it sexuality straight, but he's playing it straight, and that he is full, like Travolta in his little actory brain is like, I am Anna Turnblad. And I think it's like, my least favorite song in the movie musical is You're Timeless to Me. That might not be the actual name of the song, but that's the chorus. Is You're Timeless to Me, and it's Christopher Walken. And that song sucks. But I think like them dancing together is really fun, sweet and genuine. Yeah. Like they're fully occupied. Where they play spouses.
I would be into that. That would be so weird. Do you remember the Peter Pan TV musical where he played Captain Hook?
No.
Oh my God, it was a nightmare. Wow. Do you remember like maybe 10 years ago, NBC was doing like once a year? Yeah, they did a bunch
of them.
Yeah, and one of them was Peter Pan, where Allison Williams played Peter Pan.
Oh,
and he was Captain Hook. And there is, go watch and do the dances on that.
I will.
Because it is no Fatboy Slim video. actually,
Oh, Christopher Walken does. I thought you were saying John Travolta. I was John Travolta is fucking.
No, everybody's dancing in this, but Christopher Walken doing it is just.
Christopher Walken. Do you ever have? Sorry, this is a major digression, but I feel like as like a film lover of a certain cohort or generation, that there are actors that I like by the time they're making, like when they're making new things contemporarily, I either am not aware of or wasn't aware of their work previous to that. And so I bring this up because Christopher Walken was this for me, right? Like I probably was an early teenager when the classic SNL More Cowbell skit came out, right? That was probably early 2000s. So it's probably like very early high school. And I didn't really have any context for him like as a good actor. And then in my adult life, as I have watched like The King of New York or Deer Hunter and been like, oh, that motherfucker can act. Like, why only saw the joke? Ooh, yeah. I knock him on my ground by gesticulating too wildly. Oh, wow. Like he can actually act. Do you have anybody?
That's a good one. Well, he's a good one for me, but like maybe in that sometimes I have trouble seeing him as anything other than the kind of goofy, hammy actor that we know now. I'm trying to think because yes, he's really good in Deer Hunter and Pulp Fiction. He's really good in, but there are some that I'm thinking of where it's meant to be serious, and I just can't because he's spent the last 20 years being like a kind of parody of himself.
His voice and stuff.
Hard.
Another person I would say this for me is Liza Minnelli. Like, oh yes, Chantal says Angela Lansbury. But like as a teenager loving Arrested Development, right? Like that was my in for Liza. And then like as a late teen, early 20s, first time I saw like Cabaret, and I was like, oh my God, like she can actually, like obviously I'd seen other Judy Garland films, but I don't think I had ever seen like Liza Minnelli in an actual role until I had seen Cabaret. And saying like, oh, the like public mythos of you kind of as a joke of yourself totally obscured like me understanding why you were famous in the first place.
Yeah. I do have one, and maybe it's because I'm reading the book, but Pacino probably, because when I was coming up, he was in full on. He was full on in his hollering. Because I feel like the first movies I saw with him, like I was always aware of him being an actor, like the guy, like the one of the greatest or whatever. But like the first few movies I probably ever saw him in would be like Devil's Advocate, like the shit in the late 90s, early 2000s, where he is just kind of phoning it in and just hollering and screaming. And then when I eventually saw The Godfather for the first time, which is just the complete opposite, where he's like so subdued.
Michael is very a reserved
he's
character.
Like so subdued. There's so much happening behind his eyes, and it's totally different from the hoo-ah screaming, like scenery chewing version. So that would probably be mine for him. I was going to say De Niro too, but I feel like De Niro De Niro still in that era was like putting in some good performances here and there.
It's also, I think, the like De Niro becoming a parody of himself ultimately wasn't like played for laughs necessarily, or if it was, he's playing the straight man to other people laughing, like Dirty Grandpa or the whatever. Is what I was gonna say, it's like he's playing a distilled version of him. I'm quiet and angry, but he himself is not like yelling, dancing, being the center of the joke. He's not
itself. Doing a Dunkachino commercial. Dunkachino.
Oh yes, have you seen Jack and Jill?
I mean, I've seen Dunkachino. I've seen in its entirety. Have I sat down and watched Jack and Jill? No, but I was obsessed with Jack and Jill as a product that I've watched so many disparate scenes together that I probably at this point have seen enough of it to say I've seen it. Well, also Armand White, our beloved, loves Jack and Jill. I think it was one of his favorite movies of that year. which is hilarious.
Yeah, I've been subjected to. I have a friend who's a film programmer that for some reason generally has exquisite taste and for some reason obsessed with that film. And like when we were in college would just love to play
the Dunkachino,
videos of it.
The Dunkachino scene is pretty undeniable.
I think, yeah, we all have our...
Dunkachino!
Everyone wants my Dunkachino.
Dunkachino!
I can't get enough of my Dunkachino.
I don't know if I have a Dunkachino, but we all have
I feel like
ours.
I do have to explain a little bit because I've just yelled Dunkachino a million times. But there is a scene in Jack and Jill where Al Pacino, because Al Pacino plays himself in the movie, right? Yeah. Where he's like gotten a commercial for Dunkin' Donuts where he just walks around in a 3-piece suit that has little donuts on the vest and he just says Dunkachino.
What's my name? Dunkachino.
All the time, and it's great. And you can just play it as a little short film for yourself without watching the rest of it, as I do, and it's great.
Yeah, you need not see it. I was also just thinking about actors and cameos and goofiness. I was thinking about how in 1988, Hairspray, in both 1988 Hairspray and in the movie musical from the 2000s, John Waters appears in roles.
Yes, he's the flasher.
So he's the flasher that lives next door in the movie musical. And in this...
I know, I remember seeing him, but now I can't remember.
He plays the psychiatrist.
That's right.
whose job it is to hypnotize
Yeah, that's
Penny.
so funny. I love that. That's like classic John Waters, that suspension of taking it incredibly serious, but the doctor is literally just spitting the fucking look at this, it just following her around with that stupid thing. It's so funny.
I mean, it exists in the same, it makes sense that it exists in the same universe as a place where a practical joke star named Hardy
Hars. So good. God.
You have any other...
This used to be a real country.
Residential segregation is worse, but we had joke shops.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Joke shops and hypnotizing pinwheels.
How about any other themes or any other topics you want to raise?
That's about as much as I had on my notes. What about you?
Well, I was just going to say, I think this is a note that you have here, but I'm going to say it because I think it's relevant. I was trying to set you up for it, but this is one of, or maybe did I write that?
Oh, no, that is me.
Okay.
Go ahead, though, because I just interrupted it.
Well, because I'm like, this is a thought I had during the movie, so maybe I wrote it.
I had scrolled down and wasn't even looking at that anymore.
This is one of the few movies where fat people are allowed to be fat, and not only are they allowed to be fat, but there are people that celebrate it. And
it's not a joke, which, okay, maybe that's also a reason. With the 2007 version, I feel like just Travolta, because he's wearing a suit in that, he's supposed to, I don't know, maybe that feels a little bit meaner.
That's fair. I mean, I definitely don't support fat suits.
Well, he is wearing a fat suit, I think, right?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, he must be. But in the movie musical, so Motormouth Maybelle has a line in the 1988 movie about her being big, blonde, and beautiful, and that's a whole ass song in the movie musical where Motormouth is played by Queen Latifah. So I do think that's an important theme that carries across both of them. And I do love the Mr. Pinky's Hefty Hideaway and getting to see all of the chic. Oh, that's something I want to bring up about this movie. The costuming is fucking amazing. This is by far the best costuming in a John Waters film. When they first go to Mr. Pinky's Hefty Hideaway and come out, and Tracy is wearing a dress that it's like a 60s shift dress, but it has a drop layer to it that is like netting. Exquisite. Beautiful. And then all-time great cockroach dress. All-time one of the best outfits ever made by anyone ever in known human history. So I think something that connects, that we have done in this episode that connects with John Waters' approach, is placing side by side very serious, meaningful, weighty topics with a sense of verve and joy, absurdity, and a willingness to spit in the face of people who suck.
Yeah.
So.
You're here. Bring that into 2025, you motherfuckers, because we're gonna need it. God damn. All right. Well, anything else to add? All right. Well, that was fun, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.
We're getting there.
Burn this.
I'm sorry?
This must never be seen.